The stage lights were warm, casting a soft glow over the set of the evening spotlight. The host, Daniel Whitmore, sat across from Sylvester Stallone, his expression one of quiet admiration. The audience, a mix of longtime fans and younger generations who had grown up on Stallone's films, leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear the legendary actor speak. Stallone, now in his late 70s, had aged gracefully. His thick salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and his chiseled features still carried the rugged charm that had made him a household name. Dressed in a tailored black suit, his broad frame filled the chair effortlessly. Despite the years, his presence remained as commanding as ever. But there was something different about him tonight. An air of introspection, a weight in his gaze that hadn't been there before. The interview had started like any other. Whitmore had guided him through stories of his early struggles, his rise to fame, and the legacy of Rocky. Stallone had smiled, recounting tales of sleeping in bus stations, selling his dog when he was broke, and refusing to give up on his dreams. He spoke about the lessons he had learned, the battles he had fought both on and off the screen. The audience listened intently, some nodding along, others visibly moved by his words. Then Whitmore leaned forward, his fingers brushing over a small, slightly crumpled envelope resting on his desk. "We have something special for you, Mr. Stallone," he said, his voice softer now. "This letter was found among your late mother's belongings. It was written by her but never sent." For a moment, Stallone didn't move. The words hung in the air, their meaning sinking in. His dark eyes flickered to the envelope, and a silence stretched between them. The audience, sensing the shift in atmosphere, collectively held their breath. Stallone's mother, Jackie Stallone, had been a force to be reckoned with, a woman of strength, resilience, and unwavering belief in her son. She had passed away years ago, leaving behind a legacy of her own, and yet here, in this moment, she was reaching out to him again. His fingers twitched slightly before he reached for the envelope. It felt fragile in his hands, as if time itself had been trapped inside, waiting for him to open it. He turned it over, his name written in her familiar cursive. The sight of her handwriting sent a sharp pang through his chest. His throat tightened as he traced the letters with his thumb. He had received so many letters from her over the years, some filled with encouragement, others with tough love, but all of them had been precious. And yet this one had never reached him. The audience was eerily silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Even Whitmore, a seasoned journalist who had conducted interviews with some of the biggest names in history, seemed to understand that this was something more than just a television segment. "Would you like to read it?" Whitmore asked gently. Stallone hesitated. He could feel the camera lenses capturing his every expression, the millions of eyes watching from their homes. This was personal, intensely personal, and yet something inside him whispered that this was meant to be, that maybe, just maybe, his mother's words had found their way to him at the right time. Slowly, with the careful precision of a man handling something sacred, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The paper was aged, slightly yellowed, but her words remained clear. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and instantly his breath hitched. "My dear Sylvester," it began. A lump formed in his throat. He blinked rapidly, his vision blurring as he tried to steady himself. The words on the page swam before him, each sentence tugging him back into the past, into a time when he had been lost, uncertain, and struggling. For the first time in decades, in front of an audience that had seen him as a hero, an icon, an unstoppable force, Sylvester Stallone felt himself unravel. The studio was silent. Not the typical silence of a polite audience waiting for a response, but a kind that carried weight, as if the very air had thickened with emotion. Every pair of eyes was locked onto Sylvester Stallone as he sat with the fragile letter in his hands, his rough fingers gripping the edges as though afraid it might slip away. He exhaled shakily, his breath barely audible over the tension in the room. The letter felt heavier than it should have been, as if years of unspoken words and unseen love had been folded into the delicate paper. He swallowed hard, and then in a voice raw with emotion, he began to read. My dear Sylvester. The words written in his mother's elegant cursive hit him like a wave. He paused, closing his eyes for a moment as if trying to prepare himself. When he opened them again, the past came rushing back. Memories of her voice, her unwavering strength, the way she had always believed in him when no one else had. I know the world can be cruel, and I know the burdens you carry, he read. I see the way you struggle, the way you push yourself beyond exhaustion, chasing a dream that the world tells you is impossible. But I need you to know something: you are more than enough. You have always been more than enough. His lips parted slightly, a soft gasp barely escaping him. His mother had always been a force of nature, blunt, direct, and unyielding. But beneath her sharp exterior was a love so fierce it could move mountains. She had never let him wallow in self-pity, never let him make excuses. She had always believed in action, in persistence. But these words were different. This wasn't the tough love motivation she had often given him. This was something deeper. The audience remained motionless, hanging on every syllable. I remember when you were just a little boy, practicing your lines in the mirror, your eyes filled with the kind of determination that couldn't be taught. You've always had that fire in you, and no matter what the world says, no matter how many doors slam in your face, you must never let that fire go out. A single tear slipped down Stallone's cheek, but he made no move to wipe it away. His fingers tightened around the letter as he continued reading. I know things are hard right now, my son, but one day the world will see what I've always known. You are destined for greatness. And when that day comes, I hope you will remember that you were never alone. The words blurred before his eyes. He clenched his jaw, inhaling sharply through his nose to steady himself. This letter had been written before his success, before Rocky, before the world had finally taken notice of the man his mother had always believed in. She had known long before anyone else. She had known. He let out a quiet, shaky chuckle, shaking his head. She always believed in me, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Even when I didn't believe in myself. The audience, still stunned, absorbed his words in silence. Some wiping their eyes, others exchanging glances, but no one daring to interrupt the moment. Daniel Whitmore, the host, leaned forward slightly, his own eyes glistening. Can you tell us about a time when her belief in you made all the difference? He asked gently. Stallone inhaled deeply, then nodded, a distant look settling into his gaze. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. There was one time in particular that changed everything. And just like that, he was transported back to the lowest point of his life. A moment when he had nearly given up, when the world had seemed determined to break him. A moment when a mother's love had been the only thing keeping him afloat. The weight of the letter still pressed on Sylvester Stallone's chest as he exhaled, trying to steady himself. The audience sat in complete silence, their eyes locked on him, waiting for the story he had promised. He could feel their anticipation, but more than that, he could feel the memories rushing back as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. He cleared his throat, his voice quieter now. It was the late 1970s, he began, his gaze distant. I was broke, desperate, and on the verge of giving up. The words hung in the air, heavy with the kind of pain that only those who have truly suffered can understand. I had nothing, he continued, his voice raw. I was living in a tiny apartment that was barely livable. I couldn't afford heat, couldn't afford food. I was so broke that I had to pawn my wife's jewelry just to survive. He let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. And the worst part, he paused, his expression darkening. I had to sell my dog. The audience collectively gasped, the heartbreak in their expressions mirroring his own. He nodded slightly as if understanding their reaction. I had a bull mastiff named Butt Kiss, he said, his voice tightening. He was my best friend. He had been with me through everything. When I was struggling, when I had no one else. But I couldn't afford to feed him anymore. I could barely feed myself. He swallowed hard, the memory burning fresh in his mind. I stood outside a liquor store for hours, trying to find someone who would take him, he continued. It was humiliating. I remember looking into his eyes, knowing he didn't understand why I was doing it. That killed me, but I had no choice. I sold him to a guy for $50. A painful silence filled the studio. A woman in the front row wiped away a tear. Even Whitmore, the seasoned interviewer, seemed at a loss for words. Stallone admitted, "That was the lowest moment of my life." He sat back in his chair, his body visibly tense, as if he were reliving the agony all over again. He had spent years clawing his way toward success, but at that moment he had never felt further away from it. I remember walking back to my apartment that night feeling like the biggest failure in the world, he continued. I had no money, no job, no prospects. I had written Rocky, but no one wanted it. They all told me the same thing. It's a good script, but you can't be the lead. He scoffed, shaking his head. They wanted to buy it from me for thousands of dollars, but they didn't want me in it. They said I didn't look like a star, that my voice was too strange, that I didn't have what it took. His hands clenched into fists for a moment before he relaxed them. I almost gave in, he admitted. I almost took the money. I was starving. I had lost everything. A part of me thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was just some guy with a dream that wasn't meant to come true. He paused, his gaze flickering downward. And that's when my mother called. The weight of those words sent a fresh wave of emotion through him. The audience remained deathly quiet, hanging on every word. When I answered the phone, I didn't even want to talk, he said, a small, wistful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I was ready to tell her I was done, that I was going to take the money and let someone else play Rocky, that I'd find some other way to survive. He shook his head, the memory of her voice cutting through the years. But before I could say anything, she said, "You're not quitting." He let out a quiet chuckle, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. That was Jackie Stallone for you. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't let me wallow. She just told me plain and simple, I wasn't allowed to quit. His mother had always been tough, always believed in him with a conviction so fierce that it had terrified him at times. But in that moment, her words had been the only thing keeping him from breaking. She told me, "You weren't born to be ordinary, Sylvester. You've been knocked down before, but you always get back up. And if you give up now, you're letting them win." His voice cracked slightly as he repeated her words. She said, "You're a fighter, Sylvester. That's who you are. And if you let them tell you you're not good enough, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." His chest rose and fell with deep breaths as he composed himself. "That call changed everything," he said finally. "Because for the first time in weeks, I remembered who I was." He looked back at the audience, his expression firm. And I knew, no matter what, I had to hold on. He straightened slightly, his shoulders squaring as though drawing strength from the memory. That was the moment that kept me from selling out. That was the moment that made Rocky possible. He paused, letting the weight of the story settle over the room. And it all started with a mother's belief. The audience sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of Stallone's words. The studio lights reflected off the moisture in his eyes, though he refused to let the tears fall. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but this reliving the moment when he nearly gave up was perhaps the hardest. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly as he continued. "My mother was tough," he said, a small, almost nostalgic smile tugging at his lips. "She didn't sugarcoat things. She didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She told me what I needed to hear." Jackie Stallone had been a woman of resilience, a fighter in her own right. She had made a name for herself in ways that defied convention. An astrologer, a wrestling promoter, an unapologetic personality who never backed down from a challenge. But beneath her eccentricities was a mother who had only ever wanted one thing for her son, to believe in himself as much as she believed in him. "That night," Stallone continued, "she didn't let me talk about my failures. She didn't let me sit there and complain about how unfair the industry was. She just kept repeating, 'You're not quitting, Sylvester. "You're not quitting." He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "She didn't even ask me how I was. She didn't want excuses. She wanted me to get up and keep fighting. But it wasn't just words. Jackie had always been the kind of woman who backed her beliefs with action. She knew her son was struggling, and though she wasn't wealthy, she found a way to help him. The next day," Stallone said, his voice thick with emotion, "she sent me whatever little money she had. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't enough to make my problems disappear, but it was enough to buy me time. And time was exactly what he needed. With that small amount of money, he was able to eat properly for the first time in weeks. He could think clearly again. He had been running on fumes for so long that he hadn't realized how much his hunger and exhaustion had clouded his judgment. I didn't go out and celebrate," he said. "I didn't waste a single dollar. I used it to survive, to keep pushing forward." The reality was, Jackie couldn't solve all of his problems. She couldn't force Hollywood to see his potential. She couldn't guarantee him success. But she could remind him of the most important lesson she had ever taught him: persistence. "She always told me that success isn't about talent alone," he said. "It's about endurance, about refusing to stay down when life knocks you over." He leaned back in his chair slightly, staring at the ceiling for a moment before continuing. "I didn't know it then, but that call saved my life," he admitted. "Not just my career, my life." His voice dropped lower, filled with an almost reverent tone. "Because the truth is, I was starting to lose myself. The rejection, the hunger, the desperation. It was changing me, making me doubt who I was." He turned his gaze back to the audience, his eyes shining with something raw, something unfiltered. "But she wouldn't let me lose sight of who I was. It wasn't just about making a movie. It wasn't just about Hollywood. It was about proving to himself and to the world that he was worth something. So I held on," he said, his voice resolute. "I held on because she told me to." And then, slowly and carefully, he let out a deep breath. And holding on changed everything. The audience, still stunned, remained silent for a long moment. Then, as if on cue, they erupted into applause. Some standing, others wiping their eyes, but all understood they weren't just hearing a story about an actor's rise to fame. They were hearing a story about a mother's unwavering love. The applause eventually faded, but the weight of Stallone's story lingered in the studio. The audience, still captivated, sat in complete silence as he took a deep breath, his hands clasped together. He had walked them through the lowest point of his life, the moment he nearly gave in, but now he was about to share the moment everything changed. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "After that call with my mother, something shifted in me," he said. "I wasn't suddenly rich. I wasn't suddenly successful. But I had something I hadn't had in a long time: clarity." With the small amount of money Jackie had sent him, Stallone was able to think clearly for the first time in weeks. He no longer had to worry about where his next meal was coming from, even if only temporarily. And with that clarity, he made a decision. He would not sell the Rocky script unless he was the one playing the lead. "It was insane," he admitted, chuckling softly. "Every logical part of me was screaming to take the money. I had studios offering me thousands of dollars, money I desperately needed. But my gut told me that if I let someone else play Rocky, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." The room was silent, hanging on his every word. "So I kept saying no," he continued. "I turned down offer after offer, and each time I thought, this is it. No one's gonna come back to me after this. I'm done." But then, against all odds, the right deal finally came along. One of the studios, United Artists, agreed to make the film, he said. But there was a catch. They didn't want me in it. He shook his head, a small smirk on his lips. They wanted someone bigger, a real movie star. They suggested names like Ryan O'Neal, Burt Reynolds, guys who were already established. He paused, looking out at the audience. But I knew Rocky wasn't just a movie for me. It was my story. It was every rejection, every failure, every time someone told me I wasn't good enough. He leaned forward, his voice quieter now but filled with conviction. So I told them, if I don't play him, you don't get the script. The audience let out a collective murmur, reacting to the sheer audacity of his decision. I was risking everything, he admitted. They could have walked away. They could have found another writer and made their own boxing movie. But something in me refused to let go. And then the moment he had been waiting for arrived. They caved, he said, a smile breaking across his face. They agreed to let me play Rocky, but with conditions. The budget was cut drastically. The studio only allowed a fraction of what they would have given to a more established star. Instead of a big Hollywood production, Rocky became a scrappy underdog film just like its main character. We had no money for fancy equipment, no time for endless takes, Stallone recalled. Most of the cast was made up of unknowns. Some of the crew were literally my friends because we couldn't afford professionals. The audience chuckled, but Stallone's expression turned serious. But that was the best thing that could have happened to us, he said, because it made Rocky feel real. The rawness, the imperfections. They became part of the story. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. We shot it in 28 days, he continued. 28 days that changed my life forever. Quantum physics reveals that everything is made out of energy. What we perceive as matter is actually an illusion of energy and light. There is nothing physical. Energy is everything. Look around. What do you see? A world that seems solid, still, and tangible, but that's an illusion. Beneath the surface, every atom, every molecule, and every moment of existence is vibrating with energy. It moves unseen, connecting all things, living and non-living alike. It flows within you, around you, and beyond you. Are you ready to learn how to harness it? The power of energy? Imagine for a moment that you are holding a magnet in your hand. When you bring it near metal, there's an invisible pull, a force you can't see but can feel. This pull is energy in action. Now think, what if your thoughts, your emotions, and even your intentions work the same way? What if the way you think and feel could attract or repel experiences, people, and outcomes in your life? This is not some distant mystical idea. It's a truth that ancient teachings, modern science, and personal experience all confirm. The idea that energy is the foundation of existence is not new. In the Taoist tradition, the concept of qi or qi describes a vital life force that flows through everything. In Indian philosophy, prana serves a similar purpose, symbolizing the breath of life and the energy that sustains it. Even physics agrees. Matter is nothing more than energy slowed down into a form we can touch and perceive. These truths point to one inescapable conclusion. To control energy is to shape your reality. But how do we even begin to understand energy? Let's start with what it is not. Energy is not static. It doesn't stay in one place or take a single form. It is always shifting and always changing, and this movement is essential. Just as a river must flow to sustain life, energy must move to bring balance and growth. When energy stagnates, it leads to blockages, emotional, physical, or even spiritual. Think about a time when you felt stuck in life, unable to move forward. Maybe it was a toxic relationship, a dead-end job, or a deep sense of dissatisfaction with yourself. That feeling of being trapped was not just mental, it was energetic. When energy cannot flow freely, it creates tension and imbalance. This imbalance doesn't just affect your mood. It affects your health, your relationships, and your ability to create the life you want. The good news is this: energy is not out of your control. You are not at the mercy of invisible forces. In fact, you are already working with energy every single day, whether you realize it or not. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you take, all send ripples of energy out into the universe. The question is, are you doing this consciously or unconsciously? In the Gospel of Thomas, a text attributed to early Christian teachings, there is a saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This speaks to the power of energy within us. When we harness and direct it, we align with the flow of life. But when we ignore it, suppress it, or misuse it, it becomes chaotic and destructive. Understanding energy begins with awareness. Notice how your body feels when you walk into a room where people have been arguing. There's a heaviness in the air, isn't there? Now contrast that with the lightness you feel when surrounded by people laughing or celebrating. This isn't your imagination. It's energy in action. We constantly exchange energy with our environment, whether we're aware of it or not. This is why intention is so crucial. When you set an intention, you're giving energy a purpose, a direction. It's like aiming an arrow instead of letting it fly aimlessly. Ancient rituals, whether religious or spiritual, understood this well. Lighting a candle, saying a prayer, or meditating are not just symbolic acts. They are ways of focusing energy toward a specific outcome. But you don't need rituals to work with energy. All you need is the willingness to pay attention. Consider this: every time you think a thought, you are creating a vibration. Positive thoughts like gratitude or love create higher vibrations. Negative thoughts like fear or resentment create lower ones. These vibrations affect not only you but also the people and spaces around you. Science even shows that emotions like gratitude can positively impact your physical health, boosting your immune system and lowering stress. Energy is also cyclical. It mirrors the natural rhythms of life, the rising and setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the changing of the seasons. When we align ourselves with these rhythms, we tap into a greater flow of energy. Farmers planting seeds in spring and harvesting in autumn have always understood this. Similarly, aligning your personal energy with natural cycles can lead to profound changes in your life. So where do we begin? Start by observing. Watch your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Pay attention to how you react to people and situations. Notice when you feel drained and when you feel energized. This awareness is the first step to reclaiming your power. Once you see how energy moves in and out of your life, you can begin to guide it with purpose. Energy is like a dance partner. It responds to your movements. If you push too hard, it resists. If you move with grace and intention, it flows. The key is not to force but to align. Alignment comes from trust, from surrendering to the idea that energy knows where it needs to go. When you trust this process, life becomes less of a struggle and more of a collaboration. You are not separate from this great flow of life. You are a part of it, a living expression of energy in motion. What you do with that energy is up to you. Energy flows freely when unblocked, but more often than not it meets resistance. This resistance doesn't come from the world outside of us but from within. Our thoughts, beliefs, and habits shape the channels through which energy moves. When these are rooted in fear, doubt, or past pain, they create patterns that keep us stuck, replaying the same situations over and over like a broken record. The good news is that these patterns can be transformed. Imagine a river flowing down a mountainside. Carves its path over time, creating grooves in the earth. If rocks or debris block its path, the water pools and stagnates, losing its vitality. Our energy is no different. Over time, our thoughts and beliefs create grooves in our minds, patterns we follow without even realizing it. These grooves are not always helpful. They might be rooted in old wounds, societal expectations, or the fear of stepping into the unknown. Breaking free starts with one simple but profound step: awareness. You cannot change what you do not see. Begin by noticing the thoughts and beliefs that dominate your mind. Do they uplift you or drag you down? Is it truly mine, or did I inherit it from someone else? Many of our patterns are not even ours. They're passed down from family, culture, or society. For example, if you grew up hearing that success requires constant struggle, you might unconsciously block opportunities that come easily, believing they're too good to be true. Are they rooted in love and possibility, or are they based on fear and limitation? This is not about judgment. It's about observation, like shining a flashlight into a dark room to see what's really there. Take a moment to think about your inner dialogue. What do you tell yourself when things don't go as planned? Do you blame yourself? Do you assume the worst? These habitual responses are patterns, and they're often so ingrained that we mistake them for truth. But they're not truth. They're simply stories we've repeated so often that they've become our reality, the samskaras of the mind. In Hindu philosophy, there's a concept called samskaras. These are mental and emotional impressions left by past experiences. Over time, they form grooves in the mind, shaping our reactions and behaviors. If left unchecked, they create cycles of repetition, binding us to the same struggles and challenges. But samskaras are not permanent. They can be rewritten. The key lies in recognizing them and choosing a different path. Once you've identified a limiting belief, you can begin to shift it. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to think positive thoughts all the time. It means opening yourself to new possibilities. Instead of saying, "I'm not good enough," try saying, "I'm learning and growing every day." Instead of thinking, "Things never work out for me," try, "I'm open to things working out in unexpected ways." These shifts may feel small, but they have a profound impact. Energy follows intention. When you set the intention to release an old pattern, you create space for new energy to flow. Rituals can help with this process, not because they hold magic on their own, but because they focus your energy and intention. Writing down a belief you're ready to release and burning the paper, for example, is a powerful way to signal to your subconscious that you're ready to let go. Meditation is another tool for breaking free from patterns. When you sit in stillness and observe your thoughts without attachment, you begin to see the patterns more clearly. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. This shift in perspective creates space between you and the patterns, allowing you to choose a different response. The story of the elephant and the rope offers a powerful metaphor. In India, baby elephants are tied to a small stake in the ground with a rope. When they're young, they're not strong enough to break free, so they stop trying. As they grow older and stronger, they could easily pull the stake from the ground, but they don't even try. They've been conditioned to believe they're powerless, even when they're not. We are often like those elephants. We carry beliefs and patterns from our past, assuming they still hold us, even though we've grown and changed. But the truth is, the rope isn't real. It's an illusion. The only thing holding us back is the belief that we can't break free. Another key to releasing blocked energy is forgiveness, not just of others but of yourself. Holding on to resentment or guilt is like carrying a heavy weight. It drains your energy and keeps you tethered to the past. Forgiveness is not about excusing harmful behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the energetic chains that bind you. Visualize forgiveness as releasing a balloon into the sky. You're not condoning what happened. You're simply letting it go, freeing yourself from the burden. As you release that weight, you create space for new, lighter energy to enter your life. Lastly, remember that breaking free from patterns is not a one-time event. It's a journey, a process of continual growth and evolution. Be patient with yourself. Celebrate your progress no matter how small it seems. Each step you take is a victory. Energy, like life itself, is meant to flow. When you free yourself from the patterns and beliefs that block it, you open the door to endless possibilities. You step into the fullness of who you are, a being of infinite potential capable of creating a reality that aligns with your highest self. But samskaras are not inherently good or bad. They simply are. They represent the residue of our past experiences, the echoes of our choices. What matters is how we engage with them. When we act unconsciously, driven by these imprints, we reinforce old patterns, creating energetic blocks. But when we bring awareness to them, samskaras become opportunities for growth and transformation. The key to understanding samskaras in the context of energy is recognizing that they act as filters. They shape how we perceive the world and ourselves, influencing the way energy flows through us. Imagine wearing glasses with a particular tint. The world you see is not inherently that color, but the lenses filter your perception, altering your experience. Similarly, samskaras filter the energy we receive and project, coloring our thoughts, emotions, and actions. For instance, someone with a samskara of self-doubt may struggle to accept opportunity, even when they're perfectly capable of succeeding. The energy of potential flows toward them, but the filter of doubt blocks it, preventing it from manifesting fully. On the other hand, someone with a samskara of confidence might naturally attract supportive energy, reinforcing their belief in their abilities. One of the most profound teachings about samskaras is their impermanence. While they may feel deeply ingrained, they are not fixed. Like grooves in the sand, they can be reshaped or smoothed out over time. This is where the work of awareness comes in. By recognizing our samskaras, we take the first step toward releasing their hold on us. In yoga and meditation practices, this process is often referred to as samsara khandana, or the purification of samskaras. Through mindfulness, self-reflection, and intentional action, we can begin to dissolve the patterns that no longer serve us. This doesn't mean erasing the past, but transforming our relationship with it. Consider the story of the sculptor and the block of marble. When asked how he creates such beautiful statues, the sculptor replies, "I see the statue within the marble, and I simply chip away everything that is not it." In the same way, our true selves are already within us, but samskaras can obscure our essence. By working to dissolve these imprints, we reveal the radiant being beneath. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna about the importance of self-awareness and disciplined action in overcoming the limitations of the mind. Krishna emphasizes that liberation comes not from avoiding action, but from acting with mindfulness and detachment. This teaching directly relates to samskaras. When we act out of unconscious patterns, we create more impressions, deepening the grooves. But when we act with awareness, we begin to break free from these cycles, allowing energy to flow more freely. Samskaras also have a powerful connection to the energy centers of the body, known as chakras. Each samskara resonates with a particular energetic frequency, often aligning with specific chakras. For example, a samskara rooted in fear might block the root chakra, preventing us from feeling grounded and secure. By addressing these imprints, we not only free our minds but also restore balance to our energetic system. Breaking free from samskaras is not about force or resistance. It's about bringing light to the shadows, seeing the patterns for what they are, and choosing a different way of being. This process requires patience and compassion, both for ourselves and for the journey we've been on. Every samskara, no matter how limiting, holds a lesson. It is through facing these lessons that we grow. In the context of energy work, samskaras remind us that true transformation begins within. External practices and rituals can support our journey, but they are only effective when paired with inner work. By addressing the patterns that block our energy, we open the door to a more authentic, aligned way of living. As we move forward in this exploration of energy, remember that the power to shift your samskaras lies within you. The grooves of the past do not define you. They are simply the starting point. With awareness, intention, and love, you can create new pathways, inviting energy to flow freely and fully in every aspect of your life. The flow of energy in our lives is a concept explored in countless philosophies and traditions, each offering its own unique lens. While many are familiar with systems like the chakras or the Taoist view of qi, there are lesser-known beliefs that offer equally profound insights into the way energy shapes our reality. One such belief comes from the ancient Hermetic tradition, the principle of correspondence. The Hermetic teachings, attributed to the mysterious figure Hermes Trismegistus, are thought to hold the keys to understanding the universe and our place within it. The principle of correspondence is one of the foundational ideas in this tradition, captured in the phrase "as above, so below," as within, so without. At first glance, these words might sound poetic, but they hold a deep truth about energy and how it moves through the layers of existence. This principle suggests that the patterns we see in the cosmos mirror the patterns within ourselves. The universe, in all its vastness, is reflected in the microcosm of our lives. Just as the stars follow their paths in the heavens, the energy within us follows pathways shaped by our beliefs, actions, and intentions. What makes this belief so fascinating is its invitation to look at life as a web of interconnected energy. Imagine a spider's web, each strand vibrating when touched. In the same way, every thought, feeling, or action you put out into the world creates ripples that influence everything else. This interconnectedness means that the changes we seek externally must first be made internally. If you want peace in your outer world, it must first be cultivated in your inner world. This idea aligns beautifully with the topic of samskaras and energy flow. If your internal world is clouded by unresolved patterns or limiting beliefs, that energy reflects outward, creating barriers in your relationships, work, and personal growth. On the other hand, when you work to dissolve these patterns and align your inner energy, the outer world begins to shift in response. Hermetic teachings also emphasize the concept of polarity. Everything, according to this belief, exists on a spectrum, with energy flowing between opposites, light and dark, heat and cold, love and fear. All are different expressions of the same energy. This idea is not just theoretical. It has practical implications for how we engage with the world. For example, when you're feeling stuck in a negative state like anger or sadness, Hermetic wisdom suggests you don't need to banish these emotions. Instead, you can shift their energy along the spectrum toward their opposite. Anger, once acknowledged and transformed, can become passion, while sadness can evolve into compassion. This ability to transmute energy takes practice, but it's a powerful and empowering skill. The principle of correspondence also invites us to consider the energy of our environment. Just as our inner state reflects outward, the spaces we inhabit and the people we surround ourselves with influence our internal energy. Have you ever walked into a room and felt an immediate sense of calm or perhaps an unexplained tension? This is the energy of the environment speaking to you, shaped by the intentions and emotions of those who occupy it. In some cultures, this idea is expressed through practices like feng shui, which focuses on arranging spaces to promote the flow of positive energy. In the Hermetic tradition, it's understood as creating harmony between the inner and outer worlds. By aligning your physical environment with your inner intentions, you create a feedback loop that supports your growth and well-being. When the film premiered, no one expected it to be a hit. It was a small movie made with limited resources, starring an unknown actor. But then something incredible happened, he said, his eyes shining with emotion. People connected with it. They saw themselves in Rocky. They saw the struggle, the resilience, the fight to prove your worth. Rocky wasn't just a success. It became a phenomenon. The film earned multiple Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Stallone himself. It went on to win Best Picture, cementing its place in cinematic history. I went from sleeping in a tiny apartment to standing on stage at the Oscars, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. All because I held on. But as incredible as that moment was, there was something even more important to him. He looked down for a moment, his voice dropping to a whisper. And the first thing I did when I finally had money, he smiled, his eyes glassy with emotion. I got my dog back. The audience erupted into applause, some people openly wiping away tears. Stallone let out a small laugh, shaking his head. I went back to that liquor store every single day, waiting for the guy who bought Butt Kiss, he said. When I finally found him, I begged to buy him back. The man had refused at first, but Stallone, now in a position to negotiate, wasn't taking no for an answer. I ended up paying him back $2,000, he said, laughing. For my own dog. The audience laughed with him, but there was something deeper in the story, a moment of full circle redemption. It wasn't just about getting my dog back, Stallone said, his tone turning serious again. It was about reclaiming the part of me that I had lost. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Whitmore's. And my mother, she just said, I told you so. The audience roared with laughter, but beneath it all, they understood the significance. Jackie Stallone had known all along. She had seen something in her son that the world had taken years to recognize. She never doubted me, Stallone said, his voice soft. Not once. He sat back, letting the moment settle. And that, he said, was the turning point of my life. The applause from the audience slowly died down, leaving behind a thick silence filled with admiration and reflection. Stallone sat back, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since opening the letter. He had taken them through his darkest moments, through the lowest valleys of his journey, and into the moment that changed his life. But what came next wasn't as simple as a happy ending. "Success is funny," Stallone said after a long pause. "You spend years, sometimes your whole life, chasing it. You think that once you have it, all your problems will disappear." He exhaled slowly, looking out at the audience. "But the truth is, success comes with its own kind of weight." A few people nodded, understanding the depth of what he was saying. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "After Rocky became a hit, my life changed overnight," he said. "One day I was a struggling actor living off my last few dollars. The next I was getting offers, attending award shows, shaking hands with people who had ignored me just months before. It was surreal, going from being an unknown, fighting to prove himself, to suddenly being at the center of Hollywood. The same industry that had rejected him countless times now saw him as a valuable asset. People who had once called him unmarketable were suddenly eager to attach themselves to his name. But with all of that," he continued, his voice lowering, "came a new kind of pressure. Success had given me everything I thought I wanted. Fame, recognition, financial security. But it had also brought expectations. The world was watching now, waiting to see what I would do next. I remember thinking, what if this was it? What if Rocky was just a fluke?" He admitted, "I had spent my whole life fighting to get one shot, but now that I had it, I was terrified of losing it." The fear of failure had never truly left him. It had only evolved. Before, he had worried that he would never make it. Now he worried that he wouldn't be able to stay at the top. "I put so much pressure on myself," he said. "I had to prove that I wasn't a one-hit wonder, that I wasn't lucky. I was worthy." The industry was ruthless. He had seen countless actors rise and fall, swallowed whole by the same fame they had once dreamed of. He knew that just because he was successful now didn't mean he would always be. "And that's when I started hearing my mother's voice again," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Jackie Stallone had always kept him grounded. Long before the cameras, before the award shows, before the fame, she had been the one to tell him who he was. She used to say, "Success doesn't make you Sylvester. It just reveals you," he recalled. She'd tell me, "The same person you were when you were broke is the same person you are now. Money doesn't change that." Her words echoed in his mind every time he felt the pressure creeping in, every time he worried about what people thought of him, every time the critics tried to tear him down. "She reminded me that I wasn't defined by fame," he said. "I was defined by my work ethic, my resilience, my ability to keep moving forward even when things didn't go my way. And things didn't always go my way," he continued. After Rocky, Stallone had taken risks. Some paid off, others didn't. He had made films that flopped, projects that critics ripped apart. There were moments when he felt like he was slipping, like the success he had fought so hard for was slipping through his fingers. "But every time I started doubting myself, I'd go back to my mother's letters," he admitted. "She wrote to me all the time, even when we talked regularly. It was like she knew that one day I'd need to hear her words again." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "This," he said, holding it up, "was a letter she wrote me after Rocky II came out." The audience leaned in as he carefully unfolded the old paper, the creases showing years of wear. He read aloud, "Sylvester, they will try to put you in a box. Don't let them. You were never meant to be just one thing. You are a fighter, an artist, a creator. And if they doubt you, let them. But never doubt yourself." His voice wavered slightly, but he kept going. There will be moments when the world turns on you, when people who once praised you will criticize you, when they will try to tell you who you are. But remember, the only person who can define you is you." Stallone swallowed hard, lowering the letter. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "She was right," he said quietly. "Hollywood tried to put me in a box. They wanted me to just be Rocky. And for a while, I was scared to do anything else." The audience listened intently, sensing the vulnerability in his words. "But my mother taught me that I wasn't meant to be just one thing," he continued. "So I took risks. I made action films, I wrote new stories, I played different roles. Some of those risks had paid off. Others had been met with failure. But failure didn't scare me anymore," he said, "because I knew that as long as I kept getting back up, I was still in the fight." He looked out at the audience, his eyes filled with something raw, something real. "My mother never let me give up," he said. "Not when I was broke, not when I was successful. And because of that," he said, "I never let myself become complacent. Success isn't just about making it," he said. "It's about staying true to yourself. Once you have." The audience erupted into applause, but Stallone didn't move. He simply sat there for a moment, letting it wash over him, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had spent his entire life fighting, to be heard, to be seen, to be respected. But tonight he wasn't fighting, he was simply sharing. And in doing so, he had connected with people in a way he never had before. Slowly, he stood up from his chair. The audience, already on their feet, continued clapping, some wiping their eyes, others exchanging glances, as if silently acknowledging the depth of what had just unfolded before them. Daniel Whitmore, the host, stood with him, clearly moved. He placed a hand over his heart, waiting for the applause to settle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said after a moment, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I think we've all just witnessed something truly extraordinary." Stallone looked down at the letter in his hands. He had read it, processed it, and let its words settle into his heart. But somehow it still felt like a lifeline, a connection to his mother that would never be broken. He lifted his gaze, scanning the faces in the audience. "You know," he began, his voice carrying a mix of warmth and reflection, "my whole life, I've played characters who fight, who get knocked down and keep getting back up. And I think people have always seen me as that guy. The fighter, the underdog, the guy who never quits." A few people in the crowd nodded, their expressions filled with admiration. "But the truth is," he paused, inhaling deeply, "I didn't become that guy on my own. My mother made me that guy." Silence stretched across the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with meaning, with an understanding that went beyond words. "She gave me everything," Stallone continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not money, not connections. She didn't have those things to give. What she gave me was belief. She believed in me when no one else did," he said. "When I didn't even believe in myself." He ran a hand over his face, shaking his head slightly. "And let me tell you something. When the world keeps telling you you're not good enough, that you'll never make it, that you should give up, having even one person who believes in you can make all the difference." He paused, gripping the letter a little tighter. "My mother was that person for me." A murmur rippled through the audience. People nodding, whispering, connecting with his words in ways they hadn't expected. Whitmore cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly. "Sylvester," he said, "if your mother were here today, if she could see you standing on this stage reading this letter, sharing this story, what do you think she would say?" Stallone smiled. It wasn't a broad, triumphant grin, but something softer, nostalgic, knowing. She'd say, "About time you figured it out, kid." He chuckled, shaking his head. The audience laughed with him, though many still had tears in their eyes. Then, more seriously, he continued, "She'd tell me that she knew all along that I'd be okay, that I had everything I needed inside me from the start." He sighed, "And she'd probably tell me to stop worrying so damn much and just enjoy life." Whitmore smiled. "And do you think you will?" Stallone exhaled, staring at the letter one last time before carefully folding it. He slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, placing a hand over it for a brief moment. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "I think I finally will." The audience erupted into applause once more. Not just for the actor, but for the man, the son, the dreamer, the fighter who had never stopped believing. As the cameras panned across the room, capturing the raw and unfiltered emotions on the faces of the audience members, one thing was clear. This wasn't just an interview. It was a moment in time, a testament to love, resilience, and the power of belief. And as Stallone stood there, taking it all in, he realized something profound. His mother's voice would never fade because he carried it with him always.